Get our music going. And 3, 2. Oh, I lied. That's not. That isn't our intro. Is it this one right here? Nope, that's not it either. I'm not sure what happened to it. We have no live viewers, so we'll be all right. I have to go back into Slack. Huh, I've seemed to lost it for some reason, so we'll just jump in and then I'll just edit into the intro. So we'll start off in 3, 2.
Losing you guys.
What's that?
I'm not hearing here.
Oh,
there we go. Got it.
We're good?
The cord needed to be tweaked and pushed.
Oh, all right. Starting in 3, 2. Once again, welcome into the Boomer Bust podcast with Russ. That is Russ Lande, and we are also joined by Blitzalytics' own Roy Countryman. How are you two doing today?
I'm doing great. Excited to have another week in the books and be moving closer to going to Mobile for the Senior Bowl.
Likewise. How you doing, Russ? Or Roy, sorry.
I'm doing great, Jack. Echo what Russ said. Diving into some more tape, looking at some of these prospects, and can't wait to see everybody down at the Senior Bowl. So,
likewise. All right, so today we are going to be doing our redraft picks 21 through 32. But before we do that, I do have somewhat of some breaking news. Earlier this week, Justin Herbert, what's considered to be the number one quarterback prospect, has decided to stay at Oregon for one more year. What do you guys think about his decision, and how does this impact the draft in 2019?
Well, I love the decision personally. I think a lot of the time, financially, maybe there's a chance there's a risk because it's one less year of his career being paid, and there's a chance of injury. But I love the idea of enjoying college for one more year. I think one of the things that you constantly hear is there are very few players that stay for that extra year, that stay healthy, and regret playing another year of college football. And a lot of guys that come out early will tell you that once they're in the NFL, it really does become a business. And the beauty of playing professional football is not as great as playing college football. So I think for the young man getting his degree, he has great grades. Getting that degree is very important to him. So I love the decision. I think it's very good for Oregon. And I think, truthfully, it's very good for his future as an NFL player.
I definitely agree, Russ. I mean, I'm never going to knock a guy that wants to come back and get, to graduate from college. As you said, he does have great grades. He does put a huge onus on his bookwork. And not only that, his brother signed on to play as a true freshman tight end at Oregon, and he literally grew up minutes away from Eugene. So he's a hometown kid enjoying life there. I mean, yes, he might have had a chance of going within the top 10, but also that time to refine his craft as a senior there, maybe he won't lose much draft position until next year. There is going to be a good crop of QBs next year as well. But I think how this impacts the draft, I think it's going to place more of an onus, not so much on the players that are in there in the draft already that are either declaring or the seniors, but rather the front offices. It's going to make them turn their attention to free agency a little more, just because there isn't that consensus number one quarterback in the class. There's a crop of guys that are battling out, but they all have question marks. There's none that are the runaway picks, say like Andrew Luck of a few years ago. So it might make them turn their attention to some bridge quarterbacks, or even some younger quarterbacks that come with some injury questions, like Teddy Bridgewater, or even maybe trying to go with the bridge route with Nick Foles, or even Jack's guy Ryan Fitzpatrick. Or maybe even the trade route. You might see some guys trying to foray into that with, Jacoby Brissett, a younger quarterback that just needs an opportunity to get a starting spot, or even maybe you place a call to Oakland and see what they're going to do with Derek Carr, or if New York's going to wind up trying to parlay Eli out there if they want to go complete youth movement and rebuild. So I think it's going to put an onus on the front offices to really come up with a plan, whether if they're in love with one of the guys that are the draft prospects or free agency or trading route. And whenever they go into their scouting season, they're going to have to focus either on one of the quarterbacks or this outstanding draft class of defensive players. Be focusing on taking best player available rather than putting the onus on the position that you might overdraft.
And, the thing I would add in there, because you mentioned some of those quarterbacks, the two guys and teams that could really benefit, Nick Foles, who has another year on his contract with the Eagles. If there's a way the Eagles can manipulate it to trade him, they could gain from this. And here's a name that you got to throw out there, Nick Mullins. He goes out there, plays great football 3 or 4 weeks towards the end of the season. And I know it's only his first year playing, but the desperation in the NFL, that could lead to this kid getting traded and the 49ers getting some value back in him. And also another name to keep an eye on, does this help Ryan Tannehill in terms of his job security? And Miami saying we really don't have anybody else? Or does it make another team likely to call up the Dolphins and say, hey, we'll give you a lot for Tannehill and you can go get your future quarterback somewhere else?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. That Tannehill looks a lot more of a sexier quarterback now when you start to look at the draft. Is any of these guys going to be considered a top 10 pick now? I know me and Roy before we started the podcast, we're looking into some draft history, and this kind of reminds us of like the 2011 draft, where there was Cam Newton sitting at the very top, but then you had the Jake Lockers, the Blaine Gabbert, one other quarterback I'm missing,
Christian Ponder.
Yeah. So I mean, towards the second round, you had the
Andy Dalton and Kaepernick.
The Andy Dalton, the Kaepernicks. But in the first round, there was 3 quarterbacks that were slotted way higher than what their draft stock would have normally been. Is this kind of how you feel about this, Russ? Does it remind you of the 2011 season?
There's a little bit of similarity there, especially when you start talking about some of these guys like a Kyler Murray, the Jones kid from Duke. Because if a team doesn't view them as a top 5 or 6 pick, you obviously want to say, okay, then they're not going to be there, or if they're not even a first-round guy. But guess what? If one of those teams in the top 10 thinks this guy is a really good second-round prospect, they know the odds are he's not going to get out of the first round, because some team's going to trade up to the bottom of the first round, or a team like New England or San Diego that has a quarterback that's pretty much 100 years old is just going to take this kid for the future and try to develop him. So if you're at 8 or 10 or 12, like they were with Locker and people like that and Ponder, you're more likely to take a gamble and take one of those quarterbacks way higher than everybody thinks, because you know they won't be there when you pick in the second. So a lot of teams will do that. It is going to lead to Murray or the Jones kid, or maybe another quarterback that we're not even talking about. Maybe it's Locke, maybe it's Greer, getting some team to fall in love with them, and all of a sudden they go way higher than expected. So far, I think we've talked about, I've done Locke and I've done Greer. I'm not overly impressed with either one. I wouldn't consider either one of them in the first 2 days of the draft at this point. But like I said, everybody has different opinions. And if somebody falls in love with one, it wouldn't shock me if one of these guys goes in the top 10.
Yeah, I agree, Russ. I mean, to me, I mean, we talked on the last pod about Kyler Murray. I think I'm very high on his prospects. I do believe the only knock on him is going to be his height. Like as you said before, the success rate of guys with that stature is not very high. But if you look at his pure athleticism and passing prowess, I believe he's a top 5 pick. I'm very high on Daniel Jones as well, as you said. Those are probably my top 2 quarterbacks that I would maybe toss into the conversation in the top 10. I know you have Dwayne Haskins from Ohio State if he decides to declare, but I just get an eerie vibe. He's only a 1-year starter. Yes, it's similar to what Murray is, but Haskins, he was impressive at times, but I just get a Cardale Jones type vibe with him, where he only had a couple big games. Everybody was really hyping him up. So we have Haskins, one of my personal favorites that I'd like to see declare. He's actually quarterbacking Stanford, KJ Costello. Every game tape I've ever watched, whenever I was watching Caden Smith for my top 5 tight end article that just came out, or even last year into some of the game tapes watching him, that guy has such moxie and leadership, and his arm strength for especially deep ball accuracy is off the charts. So if he would declare, I think he would be in the conversation in my book. I'm really high on him. But I think this is going to be the year where you're going to see a lot of that second round value. Guys maybe take a chance there. But as you said too, Russ, if they don't believe these guys, if they have one or two of these guys rated in the top 15 prospects, they're going to jump off the ship to go with them because they know it's not going to make it to the second round. Mostly because of them teams with older quarterbacks needing an heir apparent, and the 5th-year option. It gives you another year of control, especially if they need a little bit of refinement, say a year behind one of them quarterbacks. It's really appealing for them playoff teams to grab one of these guys, make them the heir apparent, sit and learn. So.
All right. I know this is a little bit of a side note, but which teams do you think are going to be aggressive this year and going to grab a quarterback? I think it's way too early to really answer this question, but obviously Jacksonville needs them. Miami, a couple weeks ago, I would say if Herbert was there, they were going to be desperate for a quarterback. Now it kind of looks like if a Derek Carr was there, he would obviously be, possibly with the first quarterback taken. And the same might even be said for Gabbert. Eli is getting old. They still need their quarterback. They're not sure if they have it in Kyle Lauletta. What do you guys? Which team do you think is going to be the aggressor in terms of going and getting their quarterback in this year's draft?
It's a great question. I tend to think that Denver is one of those sleeper teams that could be a very aggressive team. When you look at the fact that they have Case Keenum for one more year, I think Elway's starting to feel a little heat that they have failed since Manning left. I wouldn't be shocked. He showed the courage to take Lynch. He made the big signing to go get Osweiler. So I don't think he's afraid to make big deals. I wouldn't be shocked if Denver said, there's a guy, we're going to go get him. That's the guy we have to have. And I will say, keep an eye on later in the first round, if one of these quarterbacks that a lot of people likes is as a late first, second round player slides, don't be shocked if Detroit goes down that road. I think there's a real thought afoot by some people there that it's time to move on from Stafford. And I think it would be a mistake. I don't love Stafford, but he's not the reason that the Lions are so miserable.
Yeah, I agree. I would be shocked if they ended up moving on from Stafford. But Roy, what do you think? Is there any teams that stand out? Jacksonville, Giants, like any teams in particular you think would go get a quarterback? Kind of seems like we were thought that Oakland was definitely going to be moving on, or there's a possibility now. I mean, Derek Carr's played quite well. He's now on. He could possibly by next year, be the one to actually own the record that Aaron Rodgers just broke for consecutive throws without an interception.
Yeah, I echo some of what Russ was saying. I believe Denver is definitely going to be looking with the way Keenum's played, but it's not all on him. His offensive line has been terrible. But I'm going to look to even your Buccaneers, Jack. I mean, Winston, is he going to be your quarterback? Is he not? Are they going to parlay him? You don't know what the decision is going to be there. New York Giants, they passed up getting a quarterback as past draft to draft Barkley. Even Washington with the Smith injury and how devastating it was, I could really see them maybe grabbing a guy, even though Josh Johnson has played well since he got elevated and signed from the Alliance. But and I'll give you a sleeper team that I think might go off the ledge if they get a new quarterback is Cincinnati. I think so many years they've just been hanging around 500, maybe hitting the playoffs with Dalton and Green. If they come in with a whole new regime and a new head coach, maybe you see them switch it up, trade away a above average starter in Dalton, get some draft capital, and draft one of these guys, maybe trade back up late in the first round to get them. I
could totally see that.
Yeah, I agree, especially if there's a new regime that comes in with it expected for Marvin Lewis to finally be gone for the Bengals. It kind of seems like that is long overdue. But then again, if they do replace him with Hugh Jackson, you never know. So we'll see how that goes.
Hey, right. they might draft a guy like Baker Mayfield and then he gets fired. So
and it'll take 2 or 3 years before he gets fired. You have to go another 0-16 season or something like that. But news that came out this week: 3 players from Clemson failed drug test, including Dexter Lawrence, who I just did the scouting report on and wrote a top 5 article on. He barely kind of made my top 5. There was a bunch of D tackles I could have slotted in right there. But I just thought that his physical dominance and his physical presence, especially in the run game, deserved a top 5. I don't even know if he was necessarily a first-round talent, but he is a big 340-pound man, very physical, very dominant, very athletic. But now he's going to be missing the game along with two other B-level, C-level players on Clemson. How does this affect their draft? How does this affect Dexter Lawrence's draft stock, in your opinion, Russ?
It's a great question. I think some teams it's a major concern because obviously um, the NFL drug policy with performance enhancing drugs, there's a good chance he's going to enter the league in that program, or at least be on the fringes of it because he's obviously going to be tested at the combine. And if there's anything still left in his system, he's going to be in that program. I think the bigger debate really comes is, and I remember hearing this in a meeting, and I can't say every team thinks this way, but I know a GM said it when I was there, and I tend to think a lot of them believe it, which is how you really don't question the steroids part because every player is trying to get every advantage, just like coaches are and scouts are. You're trying to do everything you can. But this GM said, and I tend to believe it, which is you have to question the intelligence because there's so much technology out there. There's so many things that players can take that don't get detected, that aren't going to show up in anything. Do you question this kid's smarts because he took something that is tested for? That's really what teams have to find out exactly what it was because they said it was a diluted B sample. They're not saying, hey, we have clear indication it was this drug. Well, teams want to know, was it a specific drug? Was it just the dilution of the sample? That's what they have to find out exactly because that way they can sort of figure out a little bit what they need to do in terms of what is this kid? Is it a legitimate steroid problem? Is it a problem with his testing? That's what they have to figure out. If it's legitimately steroids and he took something that is clear that everybody knows fails you on the test, that's where you really got to wonder, is this kid going to listen to your organization when they say, here are the supplements you can use, here are the things you can't? Because clearly, if he took something that's banned, it's not something that the people at Clemson were recommending as supplements and protein shakes and things like that.
Well, Russ, just to follow up on that, I was trying to dive in a little deeper, trying to get some details about what the suspension was. I heard the same thing, that it was a diluted sample of his A or B test that it was. And it said a Clemson official said there was only trace amounts of a substance called ostarine that was found in the player's samples. But the word trace amount should be underlined and bolded. And that was from Yahoo Sports. It says the PED tests are different than those for recreational drugs. Small amounts of marijuana, for example, would not trigger a positive test. But with ostarine, only any level or trace in your blood is a strike as a positive test. Another source said from the Post and Courier of Charleston, South Carolina, said that Clemson is actually doing an in-house investigation to determine what happened and how. They actually think that it might be concerning a float tank that the defensive linemen all use.
Wow.
And that's what I was trying to figure out why, because this guy off the field, everything I've heard, all the stories about him, he is an outstanding presence off the field, not only in the community about going to see, sick children, but being a good mentor for the younger guys coming up. So, and I had to give him a lot of kudos. He came out to the media event before the bowl game. Dabo Swinney told him he didn't have to because he basically already knew he's going to be suspended for the game. And he faced the media scrum and all their questions and litany of bantering about this. And this is what his statement was. He said, "I'm not the type of guy to do a selfish act like that. I have too much pride. I love this team and my family too much to put a substance like that in my body. I don't know where it came from. I don't know how it got there. I was raised different. If I did do it, I'd own up to it. All I can say is I honestly don't know what happened and where it came from." And from all accounts, when he was getting the message from Dabo Swinney on his phone, he thought his coach was messing with him. All of his teammates that were around him and the other teammates that were suspended thought the coach was joking around with them. And I have a hard time that he would go out of his way to do that. I could be fooled. I could have too much trust in the player, but especially his type of character that I've read about and seen off the field with this guy, I think it's a complete outlier. I mean, it's not to say that there wasn't something. If it was a float tank, there was maybe something in there, but I don't think it's going to affect him so much. If it is, it might be, say, from going a late first round to maybe an early second round pick. because it's not a recreation.
What I'll say there, Royce, I agree. I don't think it's going to affect them much as long as the NFL can find out the details. That's the hardest part for the NFL. Isn't so much what is it or how bad is it? It's getting the details. And the perfect example, just look back 3 or 4 years ago, La'el Collins. That incident happens a week before the draft. No one knows anything. And it wasn't that NFL teams thought he was involved or believed he was involved, because everything they'd ever been told was he was a good kid, just like Lawrence. The issue is they just have to have clarity. And with Collins, they couldn't get that prior to the draft, so they went undrafted. With Lawrence, I would put almost 100% guarantee that the league will have clarity by the time they even have their final draft meetings. By the time they get to the combine, they will have clarity. So then it just becomes what they find out. If it is, in fact, something where the team either said, hey, these are the supplements we recommend, and one of them was a tainted supplement or a supplement that they shouldn't have recommended, or it was the float tank, like you said, or whatever it may have been, as long as it wasn't something the kid has done repeatedly and they feel good about, I think all the positive things about this young man will probably outweigh it. But it's something where the NFL needs to get clarity before they can really make decisions on where they're going to place him on their board.
Yeah, I definitely agree, Russ, especially the type of prospect he is. They have a lot of time, like as you said, trying to compare it to La'el Collins. They have a lot of time to vet this out with their security detail and to find out all the true answers up until draft time. So I think this is just going to be maybe a black eye for a week or two. And then once it comes combine time, as long as he doesn't show, a habitual, repeat offender, I don't think it's going to affect him very much.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep,
The man's a natural born 340 pounder. I mean, he's a beast. They used him in the fridge package at Clemson. I mean, they gave him the ball. I don't think that he needs steroids or he needs an extra boost in terms of strength or athleticism. He already has it. And like you said, Roy, the quote, and when I listened to him, the first thing he did is he said, I would never embarrass my mother like this or intend to embarrass my mother like this. And that's what I'm most ashamed of, is that my mother has to answer questions. So just that one to me. And then again, hearing all of from Dabo to all of his teammates, Christian Wilkins come out and defend him and say that he is the most class act person on the field, off the field. I don't think it will. But if this was a marijuana drug test, if this was, another illegal substance outside of a performance enhancer, do you guys think that this would have a different effect? And what is the difference in terms of an NFL front office looking at that? Do they value one or the over the other? How does it work?
I think the marijuana would be I don't think would raise a red flag for most teams. They probably want to know about, is this a regular occurrence for the kid? Is this a kid that's constantly smoking? Or is this just a kid who occasionally, when friends go out and party, he does that? If it gets beyond that, when we're talking whether it's a cocaine or something like that, that's when there's a real red flag for teams, because they know that, I don't know if most, but a lot of professional athletes, be it football, basketball, baseball, hockey, a lot of them use marijuana. They understand that that's a common thing. But when you step above that, the question really becomes, those are major drugs that often lead to bigger issues than what marijuana does. So I would say for marijuana, teams are more willing to look the other way, as long as when they research the kid, they don't have any questions or character issues with the young man. But with anything beyond that, that's a major red flag. I mean, when you hear cocaine or heroin or getting guys falling asleep in cars because they OD'd and stuff like that, that's where teams start to really back off, because there's a major character issue that you have to be concerned about.
Yeah, I agree, Russ. I mean, with the marijuana or other illegal, I don't believe marijuana, when it comes to running a team, is going to throw a guy off a draft board. Like you said, it depends on maybe why he's using it. We've seen a lot of the cases this year. You see people that have had problems with marijuana use before, with Josh Gordon and Martavis Bryant. They were using it habitually and had a problem in addition to it. So are you drafting a player that you need to surround with a good support group to begin with? And is that what's going to make you drop him? Not specifically the marijuana use. The other substances, the more, in-depth kind, yes, that of course that would knock them down either way low on the draft board or completely off, depending upon, their circumstances, how they've grown up, if they do have a problem, or if there's even a possibility that they can even get to be eligible to play when they come into the league. because if they've had so many tests back through college, they're already going to be entering the program where one strike and they're done. You know what I mean? So the best prospect has to be available when it comes to game time. So yes, you might not completely take them off your board for a marijuana use, but the other type of issues, yeah, you're definitely have to do a lot of vetting before you would have to take a player like that. Just like any off the field
And I'll throw in there
issue, anything like that.
If the guy has marijuana, if teams took them off just for marijuana, the draft boards would consist of about a third of their guys, because in college, you're not only talking about professional athletes, guys come to be pro, but you're talking about collegiate kids that are enjoying college. So if you eliminated every kid coming out of college that's eligible for the NFL draft just because of pot, wow, you wouldn't have many guys to draft. So it's the major stuff that they worry about. When it's pot, they just want to find out if the kid has a problem. That's the big thing.
Right.
If it's an occasional thing, no one's going to freak out over it. At least the people that I've been around. I can't say there aren't some people that would make it a big issue, but the people that I've dealt with throughout my career, they would not have a problem with it.
Especially with the way our nation is going now, with a lot of states legalizing it, and not saying, you know, I'm a fan of it, but just saying it's a lot more accepted views in a lot more other places. And it's like you said, you're not going to eliminate that many people, especially when you're looking at what would you guys rather have them treating their aches and pains with marijuana or getting addicted to prescription drugs, trying to, you know, recover after each game. So not saying I'm a fan of either one, but you got to take the good with the bad.
Yeah, as a native Californian, and you know, being in the state where it was first, you know, basically accepted, it's kind of like the home state for marijuana. I don't think too negatively on it. I think it has more to do with timing and decision making. When you see a player, you know, get popped for marijuana weeks before or right before the draft or after the NFL draft, that's when you have to question the player. If they, you know, like you said, kids will be kids. And even at 21, 22, 23, you know, I was still making, you know, not the greatest decisions that I do now at 28, because your brain's still developing. I mean, you're still young, you're young and dumb, and that stuff like that happens. But in terms of timing and decision making, when you see a player make a decision like that weeks before the draft, I know I can't think of the player, but it did happen last year where it was, I think, 2 weeks before, a week before the NFL draft, or even at the combine, they tested. Ruben. Okay, there you go. See, that's when you should really. That's a red flag. Anytime you get a red flag like that, you should really vet the player.
Yes,
exactly.
With Foster, there was a litany of things to look at, and other players, when you check into it and you find out, you know what, he's a good kid. And a perfect example, really, if we go back almost 10 years, Jimmy Smith. This kid was a first-round pick. He had a lot of concerns. If you remember reading, people kept saying character, but NFL teams did the research. And yeah, the character was he liked to smoke pot. He was never, if you talk to his college coaches, they loved the kid. He was a leader. He was beloved by his teammates. He just smoked marijuana. So it's like, yeah, it's not what you want ideally, but it doesn't mean he's a bad character. And it's a matter of doing your homework when something like that causes a red flag to pop up.
Yep, I completely agree. All right, enough with the drug talk. Let's move on into a little bit more of a funner subject: the NFL redraft from the 2018. For those that missed it, we covered 1 through 10 in our episode 1, 11 through 20 in episode 2, and we are going to finish off with 21 through 32. So I will jump in with the 21st pick. The Cincinnati Bengals selected Billy Price. Now, he has struggled at times this year. He's looked like a leader. He's loved in the locker room. He's like what they've called a natural born leader. He's, you know, a leader amongst men and has come in there and filled the role well, but he has struggled at times. We'll start off with Russ. Are you switching the pick or are you sticking to it?
You know, that's a tough one. I mean, if Isaiah Wynn were healthy, I might lean towards that just because athletically they've struggled so much at tackle. But because Isaiah Wynn, I can't bank on him returning healthy. And because Will Hernandez is also an interior guy, I probably stick with the Price kid. You know what you have. He's beloved by his teammates. Yeah, he's a rookie, but in terms of struggles, he's had some struggles. But most rookies suck. So you sort of got to expect that he's going to have his ups and downs. The fact that he's beloved in the locker room, liked by the organization, that tells me they made the right pick in terms of character. He may never be a star, but he should develop a year or two down the road into a solid, tough, hard-nosed starter. So to me, I stay with that pick.
Yeah, I think center is one of those positions. Center is like quarterback, like tight end. You really don't judge year one. There's a lot to take in mentally. There's a lot schematically that you have to adjust to. It's not like a plug and play defensive lineman or a cornerback who can have success, or a running back who can have success in year one. It takes there's an adjustment period for sure at that position.
Jack, I'm gonna somehow I still have Frank Ragnow on my board, so I'm gonna slot him in there rather than Billy Price, just because the versatility to play center and guard. Sometimes Trey Hopkins has struggled for Cincinnati as well this year up front, so I'm gonna actually switch out Billy Price for another interior offensive lineman, and I'm gonna take Frank Ragnow here.
All right. At the 22nd pick, the Tennessee Titans selected Rashaan Evans. Are you guys switching it up here? He's definitely been inconsistent. Come on more later on towards the year. I believe he only has 50 total tackles. Definitely not one of the standout linebackers amongst this year's draft class. Are you guys switching it up?
I mean, for me, I probably would, and I agree. The second half of the year, he's been dramatically better than he was the beginning of the year. I tend to think, I would look a little bit at the Nwosu kid that the Chargers took. As a Chargers fan, I've seen them play a lot. And although he's rotated in and out and started a handful and been sort of a rotational guy other games, I think athletically he has shown a lot more, a little bit more consistency, excuse me. So I would lean towards going that direction, going with Nwosu, and saying, you know what, I know this kid played at Alabama, and I know Rashaan Evans is a big-time, quote-unquote, prospect. But from what I saw this year, I think Nwosu athletically has a better chance of being a long-term guy who can make plays than I do think Evans. Evans has, like we said, played better, but he just doesn't look to me like an impact, dynamic guy.
Yeah, Russ, I love the Nwosu coming out of USC, so I can't argue much with that pick. I'm going to go in a different direction, though. I'm not taking Rashaan Evans. I'm going to give him James Daniel, the versatile interior offensive lineman as well. They've had some issues up front trying to keep Mariota healthy. You can see he keeps battling an elbow issue, especially from interior pressure. And Daniels can play center and guard. He's had a very good year for Chicago this year. So I'm going to slot him in and hopefully solidify up front with Taylor Lewan and having Conklin back healthy up front.
So to revert back, I never actually gave it. I did slot in Billy Price for the Bengals. And here I still have Marcus Davenport on the board. So instead of them selecting Harold Landry in the second, I believe they could still, if they wanted, could definitely still get Rashaan Evans in the second and flip-flop these picks. So I'm going to take the better of the two pass rushers and Marcus Davenport. Landry has played pretty well this year, but that's who I'm going to slot in just because he seems to be the best pass rusher on the board, and that's what they were looking to get in the first round. The 23rd pick, the New England Patriots had selected Isaiah Wynn. I was very high on him this last year. I believe he was my number 2 guard in the draft, or interior lineman in the draft. Who do you guys have the Patriots selecting? Because he did, tore his ACL, so he's been out for the entire season. We haven't got to see him play, and we don't know what he's going to be like when he comes back. Typically, you can recover from an ACL injury. Science is what it is now, and it's improving every day. But are you guys taking somebody else for the simple fact of having a year 1 impact?
No, you know what? If it were me, I'd still stick with Wynn. When I look at what the Patriots like in their linemen, they want guys who are athletic, who can move and do things. I think this kid, the ACL injury hurts, but I think when you compare him to Will Hernandez, it just, to me, he's a step above those guys athletically. So I tend to think I would stay with that, especially when I look at their team. I don't know if he really would have played much this year. They're a team that generally rookies, sometimes they rotate them in, but sometimes those guys will sit for the whole year. So I would not make a change there. I think you stick with Wynn. His potential and his upside is ridiculous.
I do love Isaiah Wynn, but I am going to switch up this pick just because of who's left on the board. I'm actually going to slot to them Rashaan Evans from Alabama. He seems like a Belichick kind of player, and their linebacking core has not been the same, especially Hightower since he's came back from injury and signed that big deal. He hasn't had the same type of impact. They do have Kyle Vanoy, who they got off the scrap heap. They had a waiver claim that's been playing well for them, but I think that would be a young building block to reestablishing dominance on especially run defense going forward. So I'm going to slot to them Rashaan Evans.
All right. Surprisingly, he is going 13 slots lower than what he did. I have Josh Rosen still on the board, and I think Josh Rosen learning behind Tom Brady would be a beautiful fit. And maybe I actually would actually lean towards liking Josh Rosen. So I am going to take him, and I know he probably would never make it this far, but when looking at all of the teams that are ahead, there probably would have to be a team that would jump in if this was a realistic draft, would jump ahead of all these teams, because when you slot from where they are, from where Rosen was taken, every one of those teams, maybe minus Miami at the 11th spot, has their quarterback already. So he fell this far. I don't know how, but he does. And again, it doesn't make much sense in the terms of a quarterback like him probably wouldn't fall into the 20s. But with it being a redraft and how we have this structured, I am putting Josh Rosen there behind the Patriots. And I know they were pretty high on him. Apparently, they were pretty high on him this offseason. And I know that there was a lot of rumors about them, taking all their first-round picks and moving up to go get them. Probably was no validity behind that, but
that's an interesting pick, Jack, especially with Lamar Jackson still on the board. You can put him in that offense and have a new age kind of offense with Josh McDaniels at the helm. So interesting decision there.
Yeah, I would like to slot, but I just feel like Rosen could literally, fall right into the shoes of Tom Brady because they are such a similar quarterback. So that's the only reason why I would definitely have Lamar Jackson over Josh Rosen. But fit wise, I feel like that would be the route to go.
I gotcha.
So at the 24 spot, I don't know if any of us are going to change this pick, but Carolina select DJ Moore. I definitely have them sticking with DJ Moore. Russ, what about you?
To me, it's a real tough decision. It's not so much aimed at Moore. It's really the Panthers overall. When I look at the Panthers, I don't think receivers are a problem. I think it's the fact that they can't find a way to keep Cam upright. So the question is, do you go with the elite receiver or elite young receiver who has a chance to be special and has done some very good things this year, or do you go with an old lineman so that Cam has more time to throw so he can throw it to anybody who can catch the ball? To me, it's a real tough one. By a shade, I stick with DJ Moore, but I will say it is not an easy decision.
Yeah, I was right there with you. Between Braden Smith, Will Hernandez that I still have on the board, I would have loved to have to throw one of them in there.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, Russ. This one was a hard one for me. I love DJ Moore and what he's done for that offense at receiver, especially giving them a presence at receiver. Not a tall, lanky guy, don't have explosiveness or quickness. But it was a hard toss-up between Moore, Billy Price, who's still on my board, and Braden Smith, because they definitely need some help on the offensive line. But like you, I'm going to keep DJ Moore here. I think he's just had too well of an impact fitting into that offense, so I'm going to stick with him going forward.
All right. At the 25 spot, the Ravens selected Hayden Hurst. Again, tight end is one of those positions where it takes a year or two to adjust and kind of really get your feet underneath you. Hayden has looked like a decent prospect so far, but with them having so much success with Lamar Jackson, there's no way I wasn't going to slot him back in here at the 25 spot again. I just don't know if the Pats would get that crazy about Lamar Jackson, even knowing what they know now. I don't know if they would be that kind of offense. So I'm going to take Lamar Jackson at the 25 instead of the 32nd overall, which is where he went. Do I have a consensus agreement here or no?
I'm going to agree with you, Jack. I really think that looking back on it now, they would definitely have to take Lamar Jackson at 25. With the Jaguars knowing how this season worked out and their pick that they made, I really think that the Ravens would have to snatch up Lamar Jackson at 25, especially with that proliferation of that run offense and bleeding the clock out and playing complementary football with that outstanding defense. I definitely think that's a home run pick that they would love taking at 25 rather than 32.
I couldn't agree more. I'm still not sold on him ever becoming a consistent enough passer to build a traditional offense around. But clearly, Baltimore has shown the sort of forward thinking, which says, hey, we may not have a guy who's ever going to be a great pocket passer, but we think this kid's got the chance to be a winning quarterback. So we're going to tailor what we do around him. And because of that, I think it's a great pick here. I will say, I don't know many teams where he would fit that would be willing to change things up so dramatically and put the ball in his hands. Because the one thing that's going to me, when I look at putting a quarterback like Lamar Jackson as your long-term answer is, if he does not get dramatically better throwing the ball, then every single game you play, whether it's against terrible teams or great teams, you are rarely going to have a game that is not going to come down to the last 5 minutes. And that is not something generally that really good teams do. So to me, that's a little bit scary, but for me, this pick makes perfect sense for the Ravens.
Yeah, long-term success-wise, I don't know how long they'll be able to keep this up, I should say, especially with Lamar Jackson being somewhat of a smaller framed quarterback. He doesn't take massive hits. He always kind of seems to slide across the blow instead of taking it head on. But still, I don't know how long they could do this or how long it'll take for teams to be able to have enough film to game plan against it. But in year one, I mean, they're arguably the scariest team entering into the playoffs right now, just for the simple fact that they are dominating time of possession. They're giving teams three less drives or 11 less plays per game on average, and it definitely is showing. I mean, he's not going to be that breakaway Michael Vick run, but he can get that first down, and that's what's most important is just keeping these drives going. And the effect that he has on the run game only allows him to get those easier passes. So maybe he can conform later on down the road into a better pocket passer, but maybe he just doesn't have to because those wide receivers are going to be more wide open for the fact that you have to give him so much respect in the run game.
I think a lot has to do too with John Harbaugh. He at one point was on the hot seat this time, a few weeks back before he went with Jackson, and he's made the statement that he's fully committed to this kind of offense. And if so, that's almost an advantage for him because of all the spread offenses. Everybody's looking for the same type of player, and now he's gone in the opposite direction, almost the way Army recruits. Army and Georgia Tech, the way they would run the triple option, they had unique type of athletes that they would have to fit in their system. He's basically going to be picking from a pool of players that a lot of other people in the NFL ain't going to value. But in that offense and keeping Lamar Jackson healthy, if they're fully committed to playing complementary football, running the ball 30, 40 times a game and having success with it, it could be a genius move and a forward-thinking move for John Harbaugh.
Yeah, if the whole league's going right, you go left.
And well, the interesting question is going to be, guys, is can you win running the ball now? That's what we're going to find out long term is it realistic and possible to win running the ball? Because to do that, a lot of people believe, and I'm one of them, that you have to have a top 5 defense and a top 5 offensive line. So that means if they don't have elite guys on defense, are they going to be able to realistically stay in games? Because they're not going to be able to come back in games where they may get down or they have to rally at any point. So that it's going to be a big question in today's NFL. Can a team that relies on the run realistically compete long term?
Yeah, I agree. They definitely are going to have an offensive line in front of him and a defense to back him up. And if they don't, then it's not going to work. If they had a 32nd ranked defense, then he just wouldn't be able to have the same success, or the team wouldn't have the same success. His numbers might even be more peppered. But we'll just move on down from 25 to 26. The Atlanta Falcons had selected Calvin Ridley. Calvin Ridley is off my board personally. And although I do really like what Cortland Sutton has done, he is a tall, lengthy wide receiver. And I think Christian Kirk would actually fit in, would complement what Julio Jones does very well. So because of the fact that they want to have that high scoring, high octane offense, I'm going to stick with wide receiver, even though I really wanted to slot in a cornerback a la Dante Jackson or a couple others there. They could definitely use help on in the secondary, but that has a lot to do with injuries. They're riddled with injuries this year. So they have, I think, three or four or five of their starting defensive backs are out. So I'm going to stick with wide receiver, and I'm going to go Christian Kirk.
All right, I'm probably going to go totally opposite here, in my opinion, because when I look at their team, receiver to me is the least important need that they have. They have so many weapons to me in terms of scoring. Um, could they replace Sarkisian? Could that be drafted? Could they draft an offensive coordinator? I mean, if they could do that, maybe that resolves this issue. But to me, one of the bigger problems is their offensive line. I'll probably say, you know what? I'll pass on a receiver here and go with Will Hernandez. To me, that makes a lot more sense. Gives Matt Ryan more protection. I think their line is okay, but I think it can be a lot better. And I think they have to realize they have a lot of talent. It's not like you're talking about a team that doesn't have guys to throw the ball to, doesn't have guys to run the ball. So to me, right there, I go Will Hernandez.
I'm kind of the same motion, although I do think they do need a new weapon. I'm not going with the receiver here. I actually think when they had some of their best success, especially in the red zone, not for Julio per se, but Austin Hooper to me is just a guy. He's a solid tight end. I'm going to slot to them Dallas Goedert right here. He's had a good year at Philadelphia. I think he'd be a good seam stretching tight end for Matt Ryan in addition to Julio on the outside. I love Mohamed Sanu. I think that would be a better piece in the middle of the field to kind of lighten the load for them guys. I'm going to go with Dallas Goedert.
I like that pick.
I do too. Makes sense. I 100% agree with you. They have plenty of wide receivers. They definitely don't. I was leaning more towards just the idea of what they were trying to accomplish, and it has been somewhat successful. I mean, Calvin Ridley, he's led the league. At one point, was leading the league in touchdowns. Not even just amongst rookies, amongst all wide receivers. That was earlier in the season, I believe, at the halfway point. But they definitely have a lot more positions of need moving forward, especially which I think they will address this offseason. So moving to the 27th pick, Seattle Seahawks select Rashad Penny. I'm going to take a wild guess and say neither of you guys have Rashad Penny at this pick.
No, to me, it's funny. I was trying to say, okay, what other running backs might fit? But then I also look at Seattle and their history and Coach Carroll. And a lot of it is defense. And I somehow still have the Davenport kid still on my board. So I'm gonna have them take Davenport. I look at Pete Carroll's history. This guy's got a knack for taking guys that might be a little bit raw, might be a little bit sort of needing development, come from a small school. I think this guy could flourish playing in Seattle, and I think Davenport would be a great fit for them. It would upgrade an already improving defense, which a lot of people thought coming into the season was going to be bad. I think if you put Davenport there, you're talking about a guy that could be one of the linchpins of that defense 2 to 3 years down the road.
Great minds think alike, Russ. I got him still on my board, especially with Carroll. Like you said, he takes guys that are raw at their position. He's great at taking younger players and molding them to fit his system. I was really high on Rasheem Green as an interior defensive lineman that they took later on in the draft last year. But that type of athleticism and size, right now they only have Frank Clark and really Jerron Reed that are the real pass rushing threats. You inject a little bit of Davenport onto that defensive line rotation. I know Deion Jordan has played pretty well for his comeback tour from Miami, but I think Davenport would be an outstanding fit for that type of coaching people up there. Ken Norton would do wonders for him, and I think Pete Carroll would get the best out of him.
So great minds do all think alike, but I have Davenport taken. I'm sticking with the D line, and I am going Vita Vea. He is still on the board. I know that is another big fall for me. I think Vita Vea is better than his draft position on my redraft, and he also has the Washington connection, so they've seen him. I'm pretty sure Carroll was all about him in this last year's draft and just couldn't get his hands on him. The fact he is still there, and they do need a little bit more of an interior presence on that D line, and Vea can definitely push the pocket, which would only help Frank Clark's stats even more. I got Vita Vea going to the Seattle Seahawks. With the 28th pick, the Pittsburgh Steelers had selected Terrell Edmunds. Many people would question this. I believe we had I think it was a 3rd round grade on Terrell Edmunds as Blitzalytics in a whole. but he was voted the rookie of the year by his own team. Are you guys sticking with this, or are you guys going elsewhere?
That's a tough one. I like Edmonds. I think he's played very well for them. I think he's got a very bright future. I look at him and I say, okay, if I'm going in the secondary, especially safety, linebacker, sort of hybrid kid, that's my guy. The only kid that I look at maybe that I would consider here is the Speaks kid that the Chiefs took. I think he's developing each game. I think he's done a better and better job. I think he's got a very bright future. And I think in that 34 scheme that the Steelers run, I think he would have a chance to be really productive. Um, it's a tough call. I tend to say I'll stick with Edmonds just because we know he's done well. So I'll always try to stick with what I know. But Speaks is an awfully close second there for me.
Well, for me and my hometown Steelers, this is a rough pick for me. I do like Terrell Edmonds. I do think he was maybe a round too high that they selected him, but he has bailed them out from the really poor Morgan Burnett signing that they've had over the offseason. I really wish I could draft a new defensive coordinator, because our defensive coordinator is absolutely terrible at scheming up. He actually made the comment today that Tyler Eifert's going to be hard to cover, and Tyler Eifert's been on IR for multiple weeks. So for me, the Steelers defense has been starving for turnovers. Their defensive backs always take poor angles, and they don't even look to intercept the ball. So for me, I'm going for one of the better ball hawks in this draft class. I'm going to put Jesse Bates on this defense, let him play deep third, and hopefully be able to come out of the cover two and make some plays on the ball and get us a couple turnovers. Because I think a lot of the games we've lost this year may have turned the tide if we would have been able to get a couple turnovers. Our defensive backs just simply do not have much ball skills, and we are starving for it right now. So Jesse Bates has played really well for Cincinnati coming out of the second round last year.
Bates going a little earlier in this redraft, so I'm going to stick with Terrell Edmonds. He is kind of an all-around do-all player. Can play against the pass, can play, man coverage, can play against the run. So I'm going to stick with it here. But yes, if Jesse Bates would have been out there, if we had another a better safety, I would have selected. But for the simple fact that his team voted him Rookie of the Year, I'll stick with the pick. So at 29, the Jacksonville Jaguars selected Taven Bryant. Now probably wish that they had drafted Lamar Jackson. I know I was screaming at the TV this last year, but he is not on any of our draft boards. So where are you guys going? Are you sticking with Taven Bryant? I mean, that was such a stacked defensive line already. He has barely even been able to get, on the field pretty much this year. I mean, I know he's made plays, but he hasn't lived up to a first-round grade for the simple fact that there's just so many defensive linemen on that roster already.
It's a tough thing, because if I'm just looking at his playing time, the impact he's made, I probably say, yeah, I'm going to move away from it. But I'm also trying to say, okay, where are they going to be a year from now? With the disappointment they've had, you've already had Malik Jackson talk about he's not going to be there anymore. Calais Campbell is another year older. I tend to say if this philosophy of we're building, sort of like the Ravens, on a big defense and a running game, and we're hoping to find a quarterback, if that's the philosophy you're going to continue with, then to me, I keep Bryant. I stay with that pick and hope that if they move Jackson or cut Jackson, whatever you want to call it, and plug in Brian next year as a full-time guy, that their defense can be the strong, powerful unit they need it to be, and will enable them to work in whether it's a rookie quarterback or a veteran guy that they sign or trade for in the league. So I'm going to stay with that, even though he has not had a flashy, dominant year.
I agree, Russ. I'm going with the same position, different player. The way that team has been built with Coughlin, they do like building it up on the defense, playing complementary football. I think it was a look-ahead pick for the next year. They knew the salary cap strapped numbers that they were going to have to be dealing with in 2019, and they knew that this is going to be the last year for Malik Jackson and some of the other high number guys that they had signed. So I do think that for me, I'm going to slot in a guy that went in the third round from NC State, that vaunted NC State corpse there. I'm going to go with B.J. Hill, who played for the Giants. He's had a pretty good impact as a pass rusher and also on run defense. He's a little bit more of an interior presence. They've had Brian more playing on the edge somewhat and going here and there against guards. But I think B.J. Hill would help on the interior defensive line a lot more.
So I actually went on the opposite side of the line. I went offensive line. They've struggled with the run game all season long. They need some more dominant offensive linemen to help Fournette get going. Without Fournette going, they definitely don't. They don't have an offense whatsoever. There's no quarterbacks left, or else I would throw a quarterback here. So I still have Will Hernandez on the board. So I'm going to throw Will Hernandez in there for the long-term offensive guard position. I know they have Andrew Norwell, but they could have either saved that money, or they could have built themselves just a hell of an interior offensive lineman with them too. So I will take Will Hernandez. With the 30th pick, Minnesota selected Mike Hughes. Mike Hughes is now on IR. He showed signs of promise earlier in the season. I was definitely pretty high on him coming out of college. He was a top 5 cornerback for me. But I am going to stick with the offensive line, and I still have Braden Smith on there. Minnesota's only weak point, really, I think, on that entire roster. I mean, they have secondary, they have linebackers, they have D-line, they have quarterbacks, they have wide receivers, they have tight ends, they have running backs. The only thing they don't have is an offensive line. So you would be able to plug and play Braden Smith in there day one, and he would have a huge effect, I think, on Kirk Cousins' game. So that's who I have at the 30th pick. Russ, what about you?
I'm right along with your philosophy, except I go with a different player. I really love the idea of them taking Orlando Brown, the big tackle out of Oklahoma. I think part of their problem this year has been their lack of physicality on that offensive line, in addition to not having good enough players. And I think if you put Brown in there, I think he would ratchet up their physical play. I think the rushing attack, which struggled, it was very inconsistent this year. I think it would be dramatically better, and Kirk Cousins would be better. But I agree. I think it's one of the deepest rosters in the entire NFL, but they struggled on that offensive line. And I'm a believer that Kirk Cousins needs a perfect pocket to even have a chance of being a good quarterback. I think he's a little bit inconsistent and struggles when there's pressure in his face. So to me, bring in a guy like Orlando Brown and you solidify your line. He really would upgrade not only their play, but their attitude and the way they play.
Yeah, I'm on the same wavelength as you guys. I was tossing up 3 names there, whether Braden Smith, Orlando Brown, or even Isaiah Wynn, who's still on my board. I'm going to slot in Braden Smith just for the fact that he does have the versatility to play guard, and I think it definitely needs some interior presence on there as well as right tackle. And eventually, you might be able to see him swing the left tackle if they feel comfortable with him. Riley Leaf has played average to above average, but they just need some blue chip guys along that offensive line to help keep Kirk Cousins clean, because you can see his processing skills and his spatial awareness in the pocket. He is jittery, and he's not at his best whenever he has pressure coming into his face.
All right, so we are all in agreement, at least as to the position or the positional group. They definitely need offensive line help, and if they were to have any form of an offensive line this year, they definitely would be a lot better off than being where they are now in the playoff race. We'll say that. So at 31, Patriots selected Sony Michel. Is there anybody changing this one up? I mean, he's played quite well. I mean, there's a lot of other running backs that have played. Even Nick Chubb has played equally as well, if not even better. But Sony Michel has flashed at times this season, especially prior to his lower body injury. Russ, I'll start off with you. Do you think they change it?
No, I don't think they do, but I will say there is some of me that leans towards the Mike Hughes kid. Obviously, he's been hurt, but if you look back a year ago and you look at this year, the Patriots' defense is brutal. So if I'm sitting there at 31 and I have a corner like that on the board, I would have to think about it. But knowing what we know now with the injury, I think you have to go the running back here. So you go with Sony, and you hope that you can find ways later in the draft to upgrade your defense. But Hughes, to me, is a consideration here.
Yeah, I actually switched up this pick just because of the corner play that they've had. I have them taking Dante Jackson, who's played real well for the Panthers this year as press, zone cover. I mean, he's very aggressive to the ball and feisty, but I also see them maybe coming back in the second round, selecting a running back, whether second or third, with like Royce Freeman. And I think they were maybe one of the teams that were under the radar on Philip Lindsay last year. So I could see that team unearthing that kind of diamond. But I really think that they would maybe take Dante Jackson this year in the first round if we had a redraft right now.
Man, those are the two. Those are the two players that I was tossed up with. Was either Sony Michel or Dante Jackson here. I stuck with it for the simple fact that they need to take some of the weight off of Brady's shoulders, and having the run game when they've been able to use him and White. They've had a dominant run game and run and pass game with their running backs. I think they're one of the better duos in the league. So I'm going to stick with Sony Michel there, but I could have easily slotted in Dante Jackson. He literally had to cross his name off. It's sitting right here. So I decided one and I went back. So at the 32 spot, where Lamar Jackson was drafted, I personally had put in same player, I should say, different draft spot. So at 32 on my redraft, the Baltimore Ravens select Orlando Brown. I was very high on him. He was one of my top tackles last year, regardless of what happened at the combine. I had nothing but good things to say about him. When he was in college, he allowed practically no pressures, 0 sacks, I think, his last 2 years at Oklahoma. And up until, I believe, last week, he had allowed 0 sacks all season. So I love Orlando Brown. I think his length matched with his physical dominance and his strength, he's going to be one of the best tackles in the league for a long, long time.
I agree with that. I'm not saying I don't have Orlando Brown left, so I can't draft him there, but I agree with everything you're saying about Brown. I think he has a chance to be a really special player. But we talked a ton already about what the Ravens are doing offensively. And right now, if you look at them, they're trying to finish off the season. They have Lamar Jackson and Gus Edwards, undrafted kid, as their tailback. Well, to me, if you take Lamar Jackson there and like we did earlier, and you're sitting there at the end of the draft and you're ready, to me, that's Nick Chubb. That's screaming, here's our power back.
Wow.
You give me the great back like Nick Chubb. Then all of a sudden, the win against the Chargers, which to me was a fluke, I think they got outplayed for a lot of it, becomes easier. Because now you don't just have a solid back that you're trying with. You have, to me, a guy who can be special, a guy who can change games. So, to me, Nick Chubb there, he's still on my board. I think that's a great pick for the Ravens, and it really sets them up to continue this metamorphosis of we are going to be the most run sort of forward-thinking offense in the league.
Wow, Russ, that was a bomb you just dropped right there. Imagining Nick Chubb on that offense. Wow, as a Steeler fan, I'm scared. So for me, I was tossing around 2 different players. I'm with Jack and Orlando Brown Jr., and the other one was Mark Andrews, actually, the tight end. He's played really well for them, and since they already went tight end earlier in the original draft, you knew they were considering tight ends. So for me, though, I am definitely going to slot in Orlando Brown. I think he's the case study where, especially for offensive linemen, take the combine with a grain of salt. Those are big guys. They're never going to be running 40 yards unless they absolutely have to be chasing down somebody. I'd rather have a guy that can win inside of a phone booth and can dominate players in front of him and stalemate pass rushers than I want to see a guy running 40 yards down the field. And with that type of offense, he has gave him some nasty up front and run blocking and be able to collapse that end of the field and giving Gus Edwards some holes to run through. So definitely I'm going to go with Orlando Brown to bookend Ronnie Stanley in their offensive line there.
I do like the Nick Chubb pick. That would be a scary combination. I don't know if they'd have such a dominant run defense without Orlando, or run offense without Orlando Brown, but my Lord, because he has turned guys off the street running the ball into 100-yard backs for the simple fact that there's one less defender that basically has to focus on Lamar Jackson. So it opens up the run game with the defense having to respect Lamar as much as they do. So if they were able to get a top tier back, especially a Nick Chubb, who has done wonders since filling in for Carlos Hyde after he got traded, that would be a nasty combination. So any picks that stand out to you guys from 21 to 32?
I think getting the Orlando Brown for the Vikings to me is huge, and getting Nick Chubb, that's gigantic.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Russ's. Nick Chubb to the Ravens would be ridiculous, but I'd also have to say Marcus Davenport to Seattle. I think that would really help help their pass rush, especially in their playoff run that they're getting ready to take right now. With having a little bit more juice in their pass rush would definitely help with Chris Carson running like he wants to insult your mother. So.
Yep, I got to say, I'll have to agree. My favorite pick probably was that very last one. Just the idea of Nick Chubb playing with Lamar would be such a scary, dynamic, devastating duo. Words can't even describe. So that has been episode 3 of Boomer Bust with Russ. We will all be at the Senior Bowl. So if you are planning on attending the Senior Bowl, please give us a shout out on Twitter. Come find us. Come out, have a few drinks or some dinner with us. We will be on the field for all 4 days during the practice, but only a few of us will be attending the game. I believe Roy will be. So if you guys are out there, give Blitzalytics and Russ Lande a shout out.
All right, fellas. It was good being here this week, and we'll be up in there next week again.
Yep. See you guys next week. Any final words, Roy?
Stay humble and be a blessing, guys.
Love it. Beautiful. All right. Boomer Bust with Russ, episode 3. That's a wrap.